Sarah. Well, thank you, Mark and Lauren and Monty, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sydney. We already did an Aussie call out. I'm curious, how many of you are here in Australia for the first time? Wow, that is a lot. That's really cool. Well, I'm glad that you endured the long flights to get here. It's a beautiful country, and Sydney is a great city. And I know the weather is a little rainy today, but it's supposed to clear up through the week. So I hope that all of you get a chance to go stack outside some this week and see the sights here in Sydney. So Mark and Lauren, they started out talking about how this is our 16th OpenStack Summit. And that is it's kind of crazy to think about. We've spent some time talking about where we've been, how we got started, where we've come from. And I wanted to start with a little bit of that this morning. This is a very early photo. This was actually the first OpenStack trip outside of the US. This was in the end of October of 2010. And this particular photo is from Japan. And Mark and I definitely look a little different now. We're going to have 100% fewer suits on stage today, no suits. But you know, it was a really exciting time as we were starting OpenStack and building a community. And you know, that has been an awesome journey to be on. One of the things that we haven't really talked about through that process is kind of the name of OpenStack itself. And I think that the name actually does a pretty good job of symbolizing how unique this community is and you know, what we do and our approach to it. And it can mean a lot of things to different people. You know, open and stack are words that people interpret differently, and they interpret them in the context of our brand differently. But for me, when I think about this, I actually see kind of two parts that are key attributes for what we're doing. The first part is, you know, what is the activity that we take on in our community? We're building a technology stack, but it's not a rigid stack. It's not a single approach to doing things. It's actually a flexible, programmable infrastructure technology stack. But just as important as that is how we do it. And open is one of those words that people use all of the times in a lot of different ways. But for us, in our community, we have a specific set of philosophies that define what open means to us. We call it the 4 opens. And it's how we write our code, how we design our systems, how we manage our development process, and how we interact as a community. And when I think about, you know, those parts of what we are, to me, the technology is not the most important piece of what we have created. I think that the best thing that we've created is actually this community. And it's a big community. 82,000 people in 187 countries. And we get together a lot. Every year we have about 20 to 25,000 people that come to OpenStack events to work on these different issues that we face, to go after our goals of building open infrastructure. And you know, this is one of those big events here in Sydney this week. But when I think back to you know, that photo, that much younger photo in Japan, the reality is that none of us knew where this would go. But one of the great things is when you build a community and you base it on principles of openness and collaboration, not knowing where it's going is actually a huge benefit. Because what it means is that the community as a whole gets to define that. So if we think about where we started out in 2010, we had just a couple of projects and you know, some ideas for use cases. But in the time since then, when we fast forward to today, we see that this community has created incredible diversity, not only in just what we've built, but also how it's being used. We started out with a lot of IT companies. As Lauren mentioned, you know, we've seen a lot of growth in the users that we're going to be hearing from this week. And for instance, it's companies like Pacific Textiles. This is a fabric manufacturing company that makes the fabric for major brands all over the world, like H&M. In Boston, we heard from GE Digital Healthcare. who is modernizing the approach of diagnosing and managing medical records, and they're doing that with cloud tools, including OpenStack. And one of my favorite new use cases that I've learned about this year is actually the China Railway Corporation. And we have some representatives from the China Railway Corporation who have joined us. But this is really, when you think about it, railroads are kind of the original infrastructure as a service. They are a critical piece of connecting our societies, transporting goods, moving people around, and the China Railway Corporation is the largest rail company in history. And they use OpenStack to power their production IT systems, to power their passenger ticketing systems, to manage freight, to manage the thousands, hundreds, over 100,000 kilometers of track in China. You know, this is an incredible use case that back in 2010, we weren't really thinking that someday the trains might also run on OpenStack. And when we look at the technology, it's gone from those two initial projects, Nova and Swift, to manage just virtual machines and object storage, to an array of services that bring together bare metal, containers, virtual machines, different kinds of storage environments, different software-defined networking. And that's been, again, driven because we built an open community that helps to drive us in the direction that we need to go. Every 6 months, we do a user survey. And one of the really interesting stats in our most recent user survey was the usage of Ironic in production. Ironic is the bare metal provisioning service for OpenStack. And in the last 6 months, Ironic usage in production has gone from being active in 9% of OpenStack environments to 20% of OpenStack environments. That is a huge growth. And that's the kind of thing that I love to see, where we build a tool, the community helps us refine it, and then we see massive usage of it that drives all kinds of new use cases and new production workloads. The other thing that we're seeing is that not only are we getting new services inside of the data center, but we're really changing the definition of cloud. And we're taking it outside of the data center. We're moving it into all kinds of places that you wouldn't necessarily have thought of running cloud even just a couple of years ago. We see OpenStack environments in coffee shops and retail stores, out on the edge of telecom networks, and just an increasing diversity in how these services are used and the tools that people combine with them. A really, really good example of this, I think, is eBay. To me, they're one of the best examples of a company who has really taken advantage of the transformation that's been happening in the technology industry and done it with open source technologies. So this is Sunit Nadwani. He spoke in the Boston Summit as well, and he talked about eBay's journey and some of the tools that they use. But they've gone from an environment that was a fairly traditional VM-based environment to an environment that still includes thousands and thousands of virtual machines, but it also includes a very large array of bare metal physical servers, of containers with technologies like Kubernetes integrated into them. This year, they also have launched a GPU-based machine learning platform for their team. And so they have built out a really powerful set of services using open source tools. And as I think about our history and these use cases, I feel like we are really collectively answering one of those age-old questions in open source. People often say, is open source destined to just be a fast follower of other companies, or can open source innovate? And when you look at these kinds of use cases and you look at what people are building in the open, the answer is definitely yes. Open source can absolutely innovate. But I also think that yes comes with an asterisk, because we are great at innovating, and we're great at creating new technology for specific uses. But in reality, users don't need a virtual machine. They don't need a container. They don't need a network. Those are the tools that they use to build services that route phone calls, like AT&T, or that move money, like China Union Pay, or that help prevent identity theft, like Commonwealth Bank. And overall, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make better decisions and help our businesses run better. And that's not about just technology. That's about putting technology into production in the real world and solving problems. And to do that, innovation alone is not enough. And when I look at our user base and I have conversations with them, they see all this innovation that's happening in open source, and they think that it's amazing, and they want to take advantage of it. But we have an integration problem in the open source community. And this is preventing users from being able to capture all of the value from our innovative projects. And so this is something that we've been thinking a lot about in the OpenStack community. And we have put some effort into trying to evaluate what is our role in this and what should we be doing. And that's been something that we've done as a community this year. And one of the people who has helped us with that is somebody who's a board member at OpenStack Foundation and also an open source leader in a number of communities. And I want to bring her out to help us talk about this now. So please welcome Allison Randal. Welcome, Allison. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So, you know, we've been talking about this integration challenge, and you've really helped us this year think about what we should be doing as an OpenStack community to work on this.
So what does it take to tackle the integration of open infrastructure? Why do we think that we'd be good at this even? Over the past year, we've been working on a series of strategic exercises with the board, the technical committee, the user committee, and talking with our users, really exploring who we are and where we came from and where we're going. And as part of this, we've highlighted some of the strengths of the OpenStack community. And one of these is a strong model of collaboration across the community. And this is both internally, because we're structured as a collection of projects who work together to define the big picture and plan out the work for each release. But also externally, you know, you look back over the history of OpenStack, we have always been about collaborating with other open source projects, from the early days even, you know, around compute, networking, and storage, you know, Linux distributions and virtualization projects and things like that. Another of our strengths is that we have an open model of self-governance. And this allows communities of collaborators to adapt over time to new situations, new challenges, new opportunities. We have an approach to evolving infrastructure that has allowed us to approach new technologies and integrate those into our existing infrastructure to address new use cases and new user needs. And then we have an approach to development that is specifically a group of semi-independent projects with strong integration points that are well tested together and that work well together. So from the beginning, we have looked at OpenStack as a kind of an integration engine. Now, in the early days, we really only saw that as an integration of a software platform for compute, networking, and storage, with a consistent set of programmable APIs for accessing those resources. But really, infrastructure is much bigger than just OpenStack. It's a collection of technologies, and our users are combining those technologies together in many different interesting ways to meet their use cases. But really, it's even bigger than just integrating technologies, because what we're talking about here is integrating knowledge across multiple different communities and working together to create well-integrated solutions that meet the user's needs.
And for me, this is something that is another part of the DNA of our community, and that's that, you know, we've often said we fight for the users. And I think about users like eBay, who are integrating all of these technologies. And if you talk to their teams, they've had to build quite a number of tools in order to make these open source technologies work together. AT&T is going to speak in a second, and they're going to talk about some of the tools that they've had to build to make all of these open source technologies work together. So when we talk about integration and we talk about how that's a very user-driven activity, this is something that is coming directly from our community right now. And they want to be able to do this in the open and collaboratively. They want to go after those glue pieces and build them together. And so one of the things that we've done as we've kind of been planning for the next few years is we've identified 4 steps that are absolutely critical for integration. And this is kind of the minimum set of requirements that you really need to have solid integrations. So we're going to start to work on this as a community and as a foundation to align our activities around these 4 steps. And if you think about it, the first step, pretty obvious. You've got to find a common use case, a reason to do the integration. And sometimes, you know, in the open source world, we show slides like this that have bunch of open source logos on them. But in a way, that's a little bit of the problem, because this does not make them work together. When we look at those use cases from users like eBay and Yahoo Japan and FICO and JD.com, these are companies who are taking those logos and having to do a lot of work in order to make them function together. Again, back to our user survey, in the most recent data, we asked the question, what tools are you using to manage applications on top of OpenStack in your environment? And you'll see that there are a lot of different open source tools that people use. Kubernetes is an extremely popular example. But again, you go to these organizations, and how do they manage the networking, the security, the identity, and tie that into all of the systems in their business? It often takes some extra effort. And that's just the work that people are doing today. Within our community, we also have people who are building the platforms of the future. Edge computing is a very exciting, emerging area. SDX Central did a survey just a couple of months ago, and they asked people, what technologies will you use to manage your edge platforms? And 87% of them said OpenStack. But when you look at this, the thing that is most striking to me is how many open source tools are involved in this. So these people are planning to build production edge environments using a whole set of open source tools. We've got to make sure that they work well together.
And once you have defined those use cases, then you have to start bringing the communities together. You have to build trust across communities and deliver standard interfaces that you can count on when you're integrating the components. So interoperability efforts are really key to making sure that these integrations are repeatable, stable, and production quality. One great example of the kind of work that the OpenStack Foundation has been doing in this is the Open Dev event that the foundation organized in San Francisco. Now, this was not an OpenStack event, although it did involve a lot of OpenStack people. It also involved other open source communities coming together to talk specifically about edge computing in this case. And the great thing about that event is it wasn't just talk, it wasn't just slideware, it was really practical sessions, really practical developers getting together and exploring the technologies that we have that are the pieces of edge computing and the gaps between them that right now are blocking us from making a really great integrated solution. And then even strategizing around, okay, what are the next steps? How are we going to develop the rest of it?
And events like this, I think, are something that we need to see more and more of in the industry. And if you look at the OpenStack Summit specifically, you'll notice that we have a growing number of open source technologies that we feature and we provide space for, because, again, our user community is interacting with all of these already. And so after you've found the use cases, started the collaboration, a lot of times what you'll find is that there may be some gaps that exist. And so you have to decide how you're going to fill those gaps. When you look at OpenStack, we started with a couple of very small projects in the beginning, and eventually we expanded that over a number of services. And we added services to do orchestration, to do monitoring, to enable connections to adjacent communities, like the container communities and the deployment tool communities. But ultimately, all of these other tools are built around a common core that's the key functionality that's in every OpenStack cloud and the foundation for that. And those are on this map. Those are the core projects are the one in bold. And we have to really make sure that as we identify other areas to go after, we keep in mind what those core services are. Those are the foundation of it. But when we talk about edge computing, like we did at the Open Dev event, it was interesting because we identified things that are needed in order to do a real edge deployment. Those shouldn't necessarily go into this OpenStack core. Those should be built by edge experts and integrate very well, but not necessarily try to fit them into the core of OpenStack and dilute the meaning of that. So when we look at some real-world examples of what we're talking about, I think lifecycle management is an interesting space right now. In the OpenStack community, we've had a number of approaches to this, tools like OOO, OpenStack Ansible. Some new container-based ones that have come out in the last couple of years include Cola and OpenStack Helm. And we're going to see an OpenStack Helm demo in just a little bit. But that's one thing. And in our community, we see so many new things. We have, as we just saw, a lot of users that are developing container infrastructure on top of OpenStack. And so they need tools to better manage container networking and integrate that into the underlying infrastructure. We have a service called Courier. We have things that people need to improve the security posture of containers. You look at the edge space, as we've already talked about. Deploying an edge environment is very different than deploying a data center cloud. So there are some things that we're working on, but we also see areas that we need to go. And I think that the key here is we need to give all of these users and the developers who are working on these space to collaborate in the open and to build around our core set of functionality, but really let them drive the direction of this to meet their needs.
So once you have the use cases, you've brought the communities together to collaborate, you've built the pieces that you need to glue it all together, then you have to test everything from end to end to make sure that that integration is real, to make sure that it's stable and reliable. And a good example of this kind of end-to-end testing, the OPNFV project has the XCI, which is their cross-community CI. So they're not just testing individual components, but like a full end-to-end stack for OPNFV. The Zool project that Monty talked about earlier is another important piece of this. So that is a major component of OpenStack's own CI. But as he mentioned, the new version, version 3, has really been ramped up to be usable by other communities. So it's in a perfect position to now help us doing cross-community integration testing. Another important piece here is a community effort to do large-scale end-to-end testing called OpenLab. And this is to improve the user experience and performance. And some of the initial targets of this are Go for Cloud, Kubernetes, and Terraform with OpenStack. This effort is a community effort spearheaded by Huawei, Intel, Open Telecom Cloud, and VexHost.
And so, that end-to-end testing is something that we have experimented with in OpenStack, but with the launch of OpenLab, it's something that we're going to start putting more front and center. And that's something we're kicking off this week. And the team that's been getting that off the ground would love collaboration. So if you are passionate about testing and making these technologies work together, please come join the OpenLab effort. So, these 4 steps are really critical if you want to take different technologies, whether you're talking about technologies within OpenStack or kind of the broader open infrastructure ecosystem, and you want to make them work really well together and deliver value. And so, thanks to Allison and our joint leadership team within the OpenStack community, we are really putting a focus on this over the next couple of years to drive integration and make a lot of activities that we do support these efforts so that we can solve those problems for users. So thank you, Allison, for joining us to talk about it and for the work this year on helping us to get here. Thank you. So those are some of the things, specifically that we are going to go out and work on. I think that one of the other pieces about this that's really important is to think, how do we organize those efforts and how do we organize the community overall? Because I think going back to that map, we have that core infrastructure services, that set of core infrastructure services that so many of these use cases depend on. But there are also differences when you're talking about an edge environment or a CI/CD environment. And I think we have an opportunity to start to think about ways to bring people who want to solve common problems together and really build that glue in a focused way for different kinds of use cases. And these are just some examples of some of the areas that we're starting to look at organizing these teams together around. So this is going to be a big topic for discussion this week. There are forum sessions that deal with a lot of these different use cases and problem domains. And on Wednesday at 4:30, we are going to have a forum session to talk about kind of the strategy and how we as a community want to organize and pursue this integration approach. So please join us there and help us make progress on this. So we've talked about where we started, some of the things that have happened along the way, and some of the things that we've learned this year that are really creating some pain points for users. And I think that when you see a pain point for a user like that, you can look at that in a few ways. But the way I like to look at it is as a huge opportunity to go make things better for them. And this is the right place to do it. This is the community to do it, because we do have those engaged users here. We have the companies that are here participating, contributing, and part of this community to help drive us forward. We have an incredibly active base of software developers that have already tackled an amazing number of problems and use cases. And we can continue to iterate on this and apply that active developer base to new problems. And we have serious use cases, like the ones that we talked about with China Railway and Commonwealth Bank and AT&T and others, that are giving us a real goal to shoot for, to go out and address these issues. I think that overall, in the open source ecosystem, we are at an incredible point. And in OpenStack, we have one of the largest open communities that's ever existed. And so that means we do have great opportunities to go after these different challenges. It also means we have a big responsibility to tackle these problems head on. So I think that this is the right community to do it. We have a very important, critical mission to go after. So let's go make this the place where we're going to continue to build an integration engine that solves some of these biggest issues that are facing open source users today.